All right, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining our regional session. It's titled Navigating the Transformation of Regional Oversight. I think there's a lot of transformation going on, as you've gathered, I'm sure, if you've been privy to many of the sessions. And thank you for hanging in for the afternoon here. I know there's been a lot of talking today, so I hope you've heard some really interesting themes and discussions. And I think this one will also offer a lot of very interesting perspectives. Just as we get started, a reminder that there's a QR code for adding questions. Please scan it if you want to feed questions in, and we'll be monitoring those. We'll start the panel off with some questions, and then we'll start using the tablet to take ones from the audience. So I encourage you to be part of the conversation and feed your questions in. So as we get started, I'd like to have the panel members introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your background and the position you hold. I'll start with you, Cleve.
So I'm Cleve Reasoner. I'm the Chief Nuclear Officer and CEO, actually, of Wolf Creek Nuclear Operating Corporation. And our parent utility is called Evergy. It's in the Kansas City area. The plant is about 100 miles southwest of Kansas City. I've been there for 11 years, been in the industry now 36 years. So I'm starting to figure it out.
But we're always learning, right? That was
always
what we
learning.
heard earlier. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Ray McKinley. I'm the Acting Regional Administrator in Region 1 in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. I've been in the industry about 40 plus years, 20 of it in NRC, and about 21 in the industry where I also worked as a senior reactor operator. So I kind of have a dual, perspective on the situation.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Julio Lara. I'm currently the Acting Region 2 Regional Administrator. My permanent position is working with John in Region 4 office as his Deputy Regional Administrator. So I've been in Atlanta Region 2 since last April, so it's a great opportunity for me. I've been fortunate to have worked with the agency over 35 years and worked in all 4 regions. So it's shaped my thinking. I know what the industry and what the agency looked like pre-ROP, and I'm certainly very excited what the future holds.
Good afternoon, I'm Mohammed Shawaibi. I'm the Acting Regional Administrator for Region 3. Been with the agency since 1992. I didn't do the math, but it's been a long time. I started out as a co-op for a couple of years and then moved into NRR, doing various jobs. Worked in commission offices, chairman office, EDO's office, office of new reactors, had a responsibility for power uprates at one time, and landed back in a regional office in Region 3 back home in 2014. And I've done several jobs there, DRS, DRP, DNMS, and now Acting Regional Administrator.
Good afternoon. I'm John Manager, Regional Administrator from Region 4. The only one not acting. With that said, I've been with the NRC for 37 years, predominantly headquarters up here in Rockville, Maryland, 31 years or so. Joined Scott Morris back in September of 2020, and that's it. So thank you.
All right, thank you all. Well, John, since you are the self-proclaimed only not acting regional administrator, I'm going to start with you for the first question, so just be on alert. So we've talked about change a lot during this, Rick, and there are some pretty intensive changes that are coming for the regions, right? So I want to take a minute and just start with a conversation about that, right? The Advance Act and Executive Order 14300 called for a lot of changes to our programs. One of these changes is the Reactor Oversight Process. Major changes underway. The commission paper related to that proposal that the staff developed is with the commission for review right now. But also we've received commission direction on our reorganization proposal, right? So these are 2 major vectors of change coming our way. So John, would you talk a little bit about what the reorg looks like for the regions?
Yeah, so thank you very much. And as you mentioned, a major restructuring for the agency. We've gone through reorganizations in the past, Region 5 into a Region 4 years ago. AEOD was pulled back into the Office of Research, FISME back into NMSS. But if you look at the scale of the transformation or the reorganization now, it's probably the biggest that I can remember in the agency's history. And really the purpose is to meet the national demands for power within the country, for the NRC to be responsive to the national emergency crisis, the national energy crisis. So in doing that, we looked throughout the organization and how best to do that. How could we restructure the organization to do so? How can we flatten the organization? How can we improve decision making? And the model that the agency came up with is something called the business line structure. Organizations that support reactors roll up into one organization, organizations that support materials licensing inspection in a different organization. With that said, our core mission remains the same, public health and safety, and the core mission of the regions remains the same, inspection of licensees' performance. The question then is, what is the appropriate balance? And the appropriate balance given the current safety performance of licensees out there. And so that's what we're doing. So one of the thoughts to me is it's easier to work through the numbers and the spreadsheets and the org charts, et cetera. To me, the more difficult part is the staff, the organization, individuals who have worked for the agency for many, many years, and how do you guide those individuals through the transformation? And it makes it a little bit more difficult when you think about our restructuring. It goes back at least 13 months, if not maybe 17, 18 months. So the question is, what's the starting point? Is it the Advance Act? Is it the first executive order? Is it the second executive order, et cetera? So this change and the impact on the staff has been coming around for quite a while, and we have to really be sensitive in terms of the impact to individuals and make sure that we're providing the transparency and the communications and the openness to them, providing the staff an opportunity to engage and to be able to check and adjust on our plans. So even though the commission gave us the go-ahead for the conceptual restructuring, a lot of details are still being worked out, and we're working very closely with the staff, and the staff has provided phenomenal feedback. And there's been adjustments to the CNRI, there's been adjustments to NRR, there's been adjustments to the Office of Nuclear Materials Safety and Safeguards. So I think probably the biggest thing is transparency. I think we were probably honestly challenged for a long time there in terms of the information we could share. But I think now we have a significant effort underway. There's a change management plan being developed. The EDO has a phenomenal website out there for the staff to get the information. So in terms of restructuring, that's generally.
Yeah, thank you. And the model there, right, is that all of the regions would report up to a central structure, which is under the Chief Nuclear Reactor Inspector. And so the design, I think, behind that in part, so the business line structure, of course, is part of the rationale behind that. But also, I think the concept is that we would make sure we're consistent across the regions. And that's something that I think has been a priority for the agency over time. And we've used different models to try to achieve that. And we've made, I think, great progress over the years. But would one of you like to speak to how you think that this reorganization will also help us to communicate really well across the regions? And if you see there being efficiencies in having all of the regional operating reactor programs report up to that CNRI structure?
Well, I would offer we don't have all the answers. We're going to figure it out as we go along. It's not, we can have a script all day long, but the reality is we're going to figure it out with input from our inspection staff. One of the things that I shared earlier on with our inspectors in Region 2 and in other forums that I have the ability to provide some thoughts is this is truly the most consequential time in the agency's history since TMI, perhaps even longer. The changes that we implemented when the ROP came about, great changes. I lived through them, others here on this panel and the audience perhaps as well. But truly consequential changes that are occurring today, changes for which decisions that we make today will be with us for the next 15 to 20 years until we figure out whether or not this growth in nuclear energy and the technologies really comes to bear. We've made changes, proposed changes. The commission has given us direction in some cases, and we're awaiting direction in others. And we spent a lot of time, NRR spent a lot of time working with regions making procedure changes, draft procedure changes. Frankly, as much time as we have spent on those changes, procedure changes, that's relatively easy. The changes will be about, with this new organization, how do we lead our staff? How do we communicate? How do we continue this growth to this goal to become a modern risk-informed regulator? That will be our challenge. I'm certainly looking forward to working with Jeremy and my colleagues here to help figure out what does that look like, getting the input, doing our outreach, getting feedback from our inspectors. The challenges, I think, really go down to focus on culture. We have a new mission statement. What culture do we want to have at our particular offices across the CNRI organization? We talked about a culture of accountability, culture of continued improvement, and also I look at it as a culture of change, culture of flexibility. That's what the future looks like, so that in this new organization on reactor oversight, we're able to get to the good place and focus on the most important safety things.
Thanks, Julio. Can we peel back the layer of the onion a little bit more on that, right? How are we preparing for the changes to the ROP? So we've got these procedures that we're working in the background, but with the proposals that are with the commission, we could see some potentially significant reductions in the resources needed to implement the ROP. So obviously that has human effects, right? That's impacting our inspectors and the trajectory for staffing in the regions, or has the potential to have that impact. How are we preparing for those changes?
The tools, I would offer the tools that we have today are much more improved than the tools that we began the ROP. We have the Be Risk Smart to continue our journey to be a risk-informed regulator. We have the V-Lister that we talked about earlier, a process to help us reach resolution on some of these technical issues. One of the things that I picked on 20 plus years ago, someone much smarter than I said, in order for the agency to be a risk-informed regulator, we must first be risk-informed individuals. So if you really think about it, we need to be risk-informed individuals for us to be successful as an agency going forward. So going back to the, what are we going to do for our inspectors? I think one is we're going to talk about these changes in the morning, at lunch, and before the end of the day. We need to continue talking about the importance. Why are we making these changes? We're truly leveraging these tools that we have in place and changing our business practices. The days of NRR providing procedure changes, new management directives, new manual chapters, those are helpful, but the changes are going to come about when we change our decision-making processes at the site, at the resident inspector site, at the branch level, at the division level, and at the regional administrator. So we need to think about how are we going to engage differently. We cannot rely upon the status quo to get us to where we need to be. The answer is not going to fall upon us from the sky. We need to make it happen.
Thank you for that. That's very, very true. And I think that there's been a lot of work so far already talking to the staff about what these changes might look like, sort of scenario planning. I know Jeremy spent some time talking to the regional staff about where we might see adjustments to the inspection program, what that might mean in terms of staffing. So all of that, though, is based on some data-driven approaches, right? So we know our staff might need to become fungible and help us in other areas where the demand may be increasing, right? We're going to be shifting what we're looking for out of our inspectors. We might be asking them to, use different inspection procedures, or maybe lean in to help with licensing if we don't have enough demand in the inspection program. And I think we have a highly competent staff who can help us with that. But all of that is predicated on the performance we've seen from industry over the course of time, right? So in the future, we might need to change our inspection program again. I think you heard that in earlier panels, if we don't see that sustained performance that we've become accustomed to. So although we're planning for these changes, we know that we still need to keep our finger on the pulse of how the industry performance is playing out. So I'm going to come to you, Cleve, and I want to hear your perspectives about, the fact that the data we've obtained over the course of ROP implementation, that data is showing us that the industry performance has really achieved very high levels. And we're counting on that as we've developed these proposals for the commission to consider for the ROP. So what's your perspective as a member of industry about what the responsibility is of the plant operators moving forward, as the NRC changes its ROP to account for that high level of performance? What do you feel is your responsibility or perspective on what that means for industry?
Yeah, so it's interesting, this question kind of circles around change and a lot of change discussion. And when I first kind of started entertaining this question, I really thought about what's not changing. And to me, that's something that you really need to think about before you maybe get into some of the incremental change. So our station, our staffs own safety of the plant, own proper operation of our plant, maintenance, and so forth. So we have that ingrained in, and most importantly, that safety culture piece is critical. That's not changing. That's not going to change. That's our responsibility. We have a myriad of programs, of course, the corrective action program. We assess ourselves, thoroughly. We use outside resources, NRC retirees. We use them to come evaluate our performance. And importantly, the resident inspectors are still at the site. And while they might change their prescriptive things, a big part of their value, I believe, is hanging around the hoop.
Yep.
So they're in there in our business on a daily basis, so they can, they can ferret out things that might be there. So my thought is that, they're streamlining. This is not a what. We're not changing a what. Nuclear safety is still there. That what's not changing. There's some hows that are changing, okay? But we, as a station, as the industry, I personally feel obligated to make sure we're successful because, we've earned this. Let's bet on ourselves here a little bit, all right? We've earned this, but now let's take this step forward. If we want to be part of continuously improving, then make sure these next steps are good ones. So we've had personal discussions. I've engaged with my leadership team on the station that says, okay, there's change coming with the NRC. What we need to make sure is when something changes, good nuclear workers, their spider senses come up and said, all right, change is afoot, then we need our questioning attitude at another level to make sure that if something doesn't go right, by the way, there will be something that doesn't go right, okay? There always is. But that we're in that game and we're identifying that and ensuring the success of the regulator. Our success relies on a regulator. The station, when I brief them up, I say, they represent the public and we know if the public operates safely. So we need a strong regulator in our business.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've been really pleased to hear the concept of the successes being shared, right? That we have a common goal and a common purpose in ensuring, that the plants here and around the world are safe, right? Because an accident anywhere is an accident everywhere. And at this time where there's so much interest in nuclear, I think everyone needs to be paying close attention to ensuring that we're operating safely. So talking about the change and the shift in responsibilities, there's been a lot of focus with the NRC of taking on this enabling mindset consistent with our revised mission statement. So let me hear your perspectives, Ray, on how the regions are taking on that responsibility to have more of an enabling mindset.
Sure, thanks. The word enable, I think that's a great word. It's an empowering word, and I'm really glad we added that to our mission statement. I think I heard somebody say earlier today, it gives us permission. So yes, as a regulator, we can and should facilitate getting things done, and that's what we're going to do, and we're going to do that safely. In the regions, we are embracing that mindset. As you heard earlier in previous presentations, we have mission statement guidance along with clear communication guidance. It sets expectations for our staff moving forward. And our staff are starting to use that information. There's great examples in there that we're able to articulate to our staff and coach them as we embark on this new mission statement. Communications is a critical element as a clear, effective, and enabling regulator. On a daily basis, we engage our licensees on a number of issues. Our inspectors are inspected to clearly communicate findings with licensees, and are also expected to maintain an open mind to understand the licensee's perspectives. Our senior risk analysts engage very frequently with licensee risk analysts to make sure we have a common understanding of risk significance of issues. In some cases, licensees need to engage in frequent regulatory processes, such as the Notice of Enforcement Discretion process. And in those cases, we'll engage the licensee early and clearly communicate the process, make sure they understand it, because they're not in it all the time. We have more knowledge of the process and can help guide them along to make sure that they understand the process and what we expect from them. And in the past few years, I've seen a marked increase in the quality of that process in terms of licensees coming prepared to the table to discuss those requests. And we're able to efficiently move through the process, and many times allowing licensees to continue to operate when they might otherwise need to shut down. Timeliness and efficiency is also a critical element as we strive to provide excellent service delivery. Recently, we had an issue where a materials licensee came into us, an applicant who was not familiar with our processes. They were getting ready to undertake construction activities on an offshore wind rig, and they needed a unique flow density gauge, a license for it. So normally our process takes up to 90 days to complete. In this case, they needed to begin their construction activities within 30 days. So we challenged ourselves, what can we do to be more responsive to this particular licensee? How can we rearrange priorities? How can we clearly communicate with the licensee? And our staff reached out with the licensee, educated them in terms of the process, what they would need to provide to us in order to be successful. And in the end, we were able to thoroughly review that process or license application and render a decision within 15 days. So I think our staff understands the new mission. I think they understand their role in the new mission, and I think they're really excited to be part of it.
That's great to hear. Thank you for that. And you touched on a lot of the themes that I think we've been talking about in terms of the sustainability of our changes, really being accountable for our performance, timely, efficient decision making, using risk insights, and making sure we keep safety first. So I'd like to hear from Mohammed now. I want to hear, how do you think we're planning to use performance measures moving forward to ensure that we are not losing an opportunity to drive the agency forward in terms of our culture and performance?
Yeah, so I've always been a big believer of what gets measured gets done. I think I read a management book a long time ago, and that one resonated with me. And just as importantly as establishing performance measures, it's important to make sure that you're establishing the right performance measures so that you're focusing the organization, the entire organization, on the strategic objectives of the organization that you're leading, in this case, the NRC. I'll cover a few of the metrics that I believe at least drive this message home. So we have metrics on resident inspector site coverage to make sure that we maintain coverage at the sites all the time. We also have measures on the health of the resident inspector program. We actually have an inspection manual chapter with an appendix that has us assess the health of the resident inspector program in terms of retention, recruitment and retention. Those kind of go together, and when we look at the metric of site coverage and we start seeing that we're struggling, and we do our assessment and look at the health of the resident inspector program and find that we're not able to hire and retain resident inspectors, we've done that. And what we've done as a result of the things that we've been seeing is we've offered incentives, financial incentives, to be able to recruit and retain resident inspectors. We offered things that were identified to us as challenges, why people were no longer interested or trying to get out of the resident inspector program. People have families, they have kids that go through schools, they have spouses or significant others with jobs. And the inspector program, the resident inspector program, had a requirement that you can be at a site for no longer than 5 years. So as a result of these measures, and as a result of the assessments that we've done on the health of the program, we've actually modified the resident inspector program to allow people to stay longer. They can stay, we modified it to stay 7 years, and then later we found that we can go to 10 years. Just recently we went to 10 years, as one example. And like I mentioned earlier, the financial incentives also. So looking back just recently at the health of the resident inspector program as a result of these changes, we're seeing positive impacts. It's actually starting to grow again. And just in the context of measures to make sure that we address these things, we also got an additional measure beyond the agency measures for each regional administrator and their own performance plan to make sure that we're hiring and placing resident inspectors with a specific number. So that was to drive home the message that we need to focus on that. And we did, and we improved the health of the program. We also have a measure on the inspector qualification beyond just resident inspectors. We have to make sure that our inspection staff, not just the resident staff, but all of our inspection staff, is qualified to implement the program. So they have training requirements, qualification requirements, and we have metrics on making sure that they stay current on those. And that goes to the reliability of the program. We want to make sure that the people we're putting out there and the work that they're doing actually is what we expect them to do and actually is per the program that we're implementing. So that goes to the reliability of the program, the ROP. A measure that I was involved in developing, and I see Scott Morris sitting in the front here, he was also part of this one, was a measure related to timeliness of making decisions on potentially greater than green findings. We established a 255-day metric to allow us to improve in that area. That's an area where we had certain findings that were potentially greater than green that sat on the books for years back when we were looking at it. And we decided that was not acceptable. So we undertook an effort, evaluated what we can do, and we thought 255-day was a challenging but reasonable metric to try to meet. And in fact, it was challenging. For the first few years, we did not meet that metric, which is fine, because again, you're trying to drive the agency's performance and behaviors to do better. Over the last couple of years, I can report we're now meeting that metric. So I think we did drive the agency's behavior, the staff's behavior, the agency's behavior, and the performance that now we're meeting that metric. Two new metrics that are on the books for us for this year. One relates to specific to the ROP, since we're talking regional administrator session here. We have a bunch of other metrics that I won't get into, by the way. I'm just naming a few here. One is related to the resources that we spend in implementing our inspection procedures. And that metric would say that 90% of the inspection procedures that we complete will come under the maximum allotted inspection hours for that inspection procedure. So we're starting to measure that this year. Another one is dispositioning of low-level issues. When I talked about the 255-day metric, that was a metric on the higher significance issues or the greater than green issues. We have a metric this year to disposition low-level issues, and the idea there is to disposition those issues, 90% of those issues within 45 days of the end of the inspection. We expect those measures to not be met in the first few years. In fact, when we set them, and our EDO, Mike King, was responsible, was one of the people that developed these metrics, and I was with him when they assigned it to me. I was responsible for this one, or at least leading it. Thanks, Mike. We knew that we were not going to meet it. But again, its intended purpose is to drive different behaviors, better performance. So we may not need it. We may not meet it first year, second year, but like the 255-day metric, I think it will make us better. And I think we will ultimately get to meeting that metric. And all these things, these timeliness, resource metrics, I think they're driving us to be more timely, more efficient, making sure that we're spending the right time on the right things.
Yeah, thank you, Mo.
Yep.
I think it also makes us more aware of how we're spending our time, right? So I think it also drives a better accountability and awareness. And I think even in a very subtle way, that can help to improve performance, because then, the inspectors are very cognizant of how they're spending their time. I think we all realize every hour an inspector bills goes directly to that licensee, where they're doing the inspection. So I think that, even having that metric in place will help them to be even more aware of the importance of spending their time, really where it matters. So speaking of inspection planning, so we've gotten some great questions from the audience. I'm going to start incorporating some of those into our conversation. So I want to start with a question about what life will look like in this new realm where we have the Chief Nuclear Reactor Inspectorate, and you'll have this standalone entity. So the question really focuses around how will we be able to incorporate risk insights in this new environment? So it's always been a challenge to incorporate risk-informed decision-making into inspections. So with this as a standalone entity, our audience is asking, how will the organization maintain momentum to focus on safety significance? So do you all have any thoughts about how, as a standalone body, that CNRI will help us to be better risk-informed and really focus on spending our inspection time on the most safety significant matters?
I'll take a stab at it and actually give credit to Jeremy. Last night, Julio and I and Jeremy, we were out at dinner chatting this and whatever, and Jeremy talked about a discussion he had with our Office of the Chief Information Officer using AI, and how can we use AI in combination with NRC inspection reports, samples, and in combination with the NRC SPAR models, and throw that all together, And in terms of, with those inspection samples, is the NRC really focused on areas of the highest safety significance? Are there variations between Regions 1, Region 2, Region 3, Region 4? Are particular sites, particular inspectors at sites looking at the same system, the same components, time in, time out? And if you use a tool like AI combined with the NRC SPAR models, you ought to be able to automate it. And then you can also bring in operational experience as time goes on. So hopefully, I like the response, but I got to give credit to Jeremy, for it. So it's, yeah.
Great. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll say something here. I don't, even though we're under the CNRI and the new, actually being under the CNRI and the new organization is going to drive consistency. I mean, we're going to be 4 regions under the same CNRI. I think that will drive consistency, and I think the CNRI will focus on making sure that we're driving consistency. In the context of, are we losing something by separating from other offices? We're not going to live in isolation. We never did when we were regional administrators and we had NRR to work with. We always worked with NRR to make sure that we were knowledgeable of what they had to offer, they were knowledgeable of what we had to offer. It was always teamwork with our program offices. Same on the materials side. Under the old model, we had both reactors and materials. We interacted with both sides, and we always kept each other informed and plugged into what was important and what we need to do. So I don't see that changing. We're not going to live in isolation, and I think on the consistency front, I think the CNRI model will actually help us.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's one of the things we recognized in trying to implement the business line model. The ideal scenario would be that each office has its self-contained business line and all the operations. The challenge became with the operating reactor business line, you were looking at over an 800-person office, and that's probably a little bit untenable. That would be a big leap from what we've traditionally held as our office sizes. So with that comes the need to coordinate, obviously, between NRR and the CNRI, because you've got the licensing and oversight communities separate. So there's going to be a really important need to continue that open lines of communication so that we're inspecting consistent with the licensing basis. So great. So now, Cleve, I'm going to bring you into this conversation, but I want to hear from both our NRC leaders as well as Cleve, because this question asks about the typically industry has had a performance that's cyclical in nature. And honestly, I think we've all run through cycles in terms of, if you look at, people in the agency will say, oh, there haven't been any hiring opportunities. It seems like most things are cyclical, right? You'll have a period where there aren't opportunities or, certain parameters, and then they'll open up again. So, here we're talking about industry performance as the cyclical nature of that. So given that, how will the NRC ensure performance-based oversight approaches appropriately distinguishing between normal cyclical performance fluctuations and then indicators of sustained or systematic performance decline? So I want to hear from you first, Cleve, in terms of what you think you'll be looking at from an industry perspective so that you can see what indicators, where you might need to focus more if there are some performance declines. And then I'll like to hear from our regional leaders about what sort of mileposts or measures would cause concern for you and cause you to want to revisit how we were approaching oversight. When will that cyclical nature be of concern that would prompt action?
Yeah, I think the first thing is don't accept that. Don't accept that cyclical performance, right? We say, oh, it's natural, right? You just said, right? Well, it happens, No, don't accept that. Now the question is, what does that mean not to accept it? And for us in the industry, INPO is leading us strongly in this regard. The industry, if you really look over the course of time, INPO has a myriad of metrics. The performance has just kept getting better and better and better. And we've focused for the last decade on there's just a few plants that are having cyclic performance kind of thing. And we kept making that group smaller and smaller. So the performance is very high, okay? Now, the next step is how do you make that sustainable? So that is the phrasing that is dominating our conversations around performance. And so what we've done is we've extended the metrics out so that there's a sort of a short-term performance measure and this cross-reference to a long-term performance measure. So to be really good, you have to be good, and you have to be good for a long time to climb up that ladder. And that is the most fundamental performance measure that we look at. In addition to that, generally the long windows of INPO performance review for training accreditation, for example, is 6 years. Corporate evaluations are over a 6-year period of time. So we periodically now pull indicators out over a 6-year period and drive those down into even a department level and say, Department X, you haven't, what's the right way to say it? You've intermittently been yellow over the course of time, right? Maybe you've been green, but you never stay there very long, all right? get that down into that department level. Why is that? And grind that level of performance up. So again, I'll circle back, just say that don't accept that that's a inevitability of that cyclic performance.
That's great, thank you.
Well, from an inspector's perspective, one of the things that I think we'll be facing as a challenge is in the area of knowledge transfer. What does declining performance look like? The industry as a whole, its performance is sustained at a high level, as Cleve just stated. So what does poor performance or declining performance look like, and how will we recognize it? If we have inspectors or branch inspectors that are in a branch for which the sites in that branch are all operating well, how will those newer inspectors that are assigned to that particular branch recognize and understand the complexities of events, transits, scrams, and how do we know that they will react appropriately? So we need to cross regional boundaries, and we just started this in Region 2. We're not going to limit ourselves to plants, events within a particular branch. As unusual or rare as they may be, these complex events, complex transients that occur in Region 4, we're going to look for opportunities to learn from them in Region 2. We're going to break down those events, bring in our newer inspectors, share them with them through the training from our risk analysts and others. What does declining performance, what does poor performance look like, and what would be our area of questioning if you were at a site? So to me, knowledge transfer, new ways of training our newer inspectors, leveraging our risk analysts, senior reactor analysts, is we're going to have to break down barriers and think differently about how to bring that knowledge base to our newer employees.
I might add, I just saw the NRC mission symbol in one of the other sessions, right? And around the periphery, they're using the staying on top principles from INPO. Okay? I think it's worthwhile to discuss where those principles came from. The source is INPO looked at a long window of performance, and there were, I forget the number, 5 to 10 plants that had very high performance for a very long time. That was the population they selected. And they went to those sites and analyzed them to determine what were the key parameters that allowed them to have that sustainable performance. And those 5 areas of staying on top are the outcome of that knowledge. So you went right there, right? Your first answer went right to that leader development and that whole knowledge piece, right?
That's a great topic. And one of the things we've learned as we've been doing some benchmarking with the management models is this idea of the leadership as trainers, right? The responsibility to help impart knowledge and share that. So would you all like to offer some perspectives about how you're doing that on a day-to-day basis? How are you helping to help your staff understand the new mission statement, what it means? How are you helping them to understand why we're making these changes to our rules, our oversight processes? Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like on a day-to-day basis?
So, I'll offer. So one is, engagement. I mean, engagement across the entire organization, be it all employee meetings, engagement at the division level, at the branch level, et cetera. One of the things we do in Region 4 very often is after our structured meeting, we'll stay after and just discuss topics, concerns, issues, where the direction of the agency is going and what it means to our staff, and allow staff to have opportunity to reflect upon that. And then you also mentioned, I guess, knowledge management. There's a very structured program that NRR runs in terms of the ROP knowledge management program, but there's also programs that each and every region runs, be it at division level, branch level, et cetera. One of the things I know Region 4 does in terms of any potential findings, they take those findings in front of a board or in front of a panel and they discuss it. In addition to the responsible branch chief being there, many a times it's the new staff there, the individuals that are going through training and qualifications. So all those opportunities that you have to engage your staff, be it the experienced staff or the new staff, really helps you along that path.
Yeah, I'll offer. We have similar things in Region 3. So we have like inspector debriefs where people come together and talk about, like you have in Region 4. We have what we call PRISM. I think it was created by you, Julio, back when you were in Region 3. This is where we come together on topics of interest to the staff that we believe would add value, and we will take a topic and discuss it at PRISM and have everybody engaged. The idea is come together, we'll talk about it, you'll ask questions, we'll hopefully leave some good information, good knowledge with everybody. Separate from the things that we've set up, because we also have plant status meetings where we go over things that we're seeing in the region on a weekly basis and review events that we've seen over the last week or things of significance that we've seen over the last week. People get to brief out on those. In addition to that, we as leaders mentor people, and sometimes we have opportunities to stay behind and just get with people. We had a meeting recently with the CNRI, acting CNRI, to talk to us about the changes that are happening in the regions as a result of the restructuring. We stayed back. We said, hey, let's stay back, let's talk about this. People have questions, people need answers. It may not be technical, but we're transferring knowledge, getting them on board, making sure that they have the information that they need to make informed decisions. So we stayed back for about 45 minutes to talk about kind of where we're going, answer some questions, and that kind of thing. We mentor people. I think every one of us probably have mentees that we mentor. Those are opportunities to do one-on-one type of knowledge management and transfer, whether it's career or whether it's challenges that they're facing, insights, thoughts that we can give them.
Yeah, and sharing successes, I think, really resonates with folks where you can demonstrate the examples and explain why it was important to engage in certain behaviors to lead to that success.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And I think one of the things we recognized, over the course of time, it used to be the success story that an inspector would come back from inspection and have this great finding that they could brief out to everyone. And I think we've recognized the need to also socialize when people use a process like VLISR, right? The very low safety significance issue resolution process. What a mouthful, huh? When they use VLISR successfully, really talking about that and helping to grow the acceptance of that and helping people to understand the importance of it. So we have a question from the audience actually targeting in and asking, how is the importance of VLISR being socialized with our resident inspectors so that we know they're aligned with the vision of NRC leadership on use of this model?
I think we leverage that process quite a bit, or at least it's in the forefront of our thinking. We really want inspectors to focus their efforts on things that are really important. So a lot of times they'll identify an issue, but we don't want them spending a lot of energy on issues that are unclear on a regulatory basis that have very low safety significance. We'd rather them focus their efforts on the more important issues. So we do use it quite a bit in Region 1 and discuss it. Should we be in that process? Is it applicable or is it not? Mm-hmm. So we go there quite a bit.
I'll just offer, we have a process within Region 4, it's called the STAR Award, and I can't recall what the acronym stands for, but recently we've given awards for use in the VLISR process. I think one thing is, when you step back from VLISR, a particular region, is it good or bad? They use VLISR 0, 1, 5, 10, 20, 30. I think you got to be careful there. In a perfect world, VLISR would never be used because you would never be looking at the stuff of exceedingly low importance in the first place, so you would never have to enter that process. The challenge is, so if you are in the weeds on those issues and you don't use the process, that's where the challenges are. So, in our engagement with the sites, with Cleve and Jamie and others, we do look for feedback in terms of, how is our staff, what are the issues that they're pursuing, and yeah.
Thank you.
I can add. So we were fortunate in Region 3. We had Jack Geisner, our regional administrator at the time, was actually the champion for the VLISR project. So when I heard the question, I said, we have communicated that. Now, anybody out there that has Region 3 plans, see me afterwards if you don't think that it's clear. Jack was the sponsor, the SES sponsor. We had Carlos Doder, who was a branch chief that was also on the project. So I feel like we have communicated that. I look for feedback as well, John, and I hope I get some if I'm wrong. But I think we're past the get people on board with VLISR. We're on to the other things that we're doing now, is my sense. But like I said, correct me if I'm wrong. Any Region 3 plans that are out there?
Well, thanks for opening the door to that.
Yeah, always.
So another question kind of in the realm of metrics and, really driving performance from their audience. I've got the question of, recognizing we mentioned the 45-day metric to resolve low-level issues, and we've said that that could be missed for the first couple of years. The question is, will there be any accountability measures to minimize exceeding the 45-day metric? And you could maybe touch on sort of accountability, but also how are you going to closely monitor that so that we know we're approaching it and we have conversations about, can we really drive to completion and meet that 45-day metric on a, case-by-case basis, if you all want to tackle that.
Yeah, I think that 45 days, that's a backstop. I mean, that's as long as you want to go. I think sometimes people frame their thinking in terms of that. Well, I have 45 days, so that's how long I have. We like to challenge folks like, okay, how long do you really need? Can you lay out the schedule milestones? What are your next steps? So that we're making deliberate steps to move towards completion rather than allow it to drag on a timeline.
Mm-hmm. Like that.
Yeah, for me, I agree. It's a backstop. I try to reflect back on my time when I was at a site. For me, if an inspector has an issue they're pursuing with a licensee in January of the first quarter of the year, we should be able to make a decision by the end of January. The 45 days simply just go to documenting the conclusion and inspection report. So decision making as we go along for the resident inspector program, as we go along, make the decision. Hence, when we get to the 45-day metric, we're done. That report will be out fairly quickly. So it's about changing our practices, how we think, decision making as the issues are identified, close it out, get the help you need, and let's move on to the next issue. So those are the ideas I think we need to start having conversation about with the CNRI to see if there's something else we can do across all the regions so we all move in concert in that same direction.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now there's a specific question for you, Ray.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, you're in trouble now. So this is a question, given your significant experience as an SRO in industry and as a regulator, so they're giving you credit for all the experience you have, right, as a lead up to the question. It's actually, I'd like to hear other thoughts on it, so you all can chuckle, but you're probably going to be up in the queue next. So what leadership challenges are you experiencing and how are you addressing them at a time that's uncertain for many regional staff? So I think all of us probably have some perspectives on that. So you can go first and then we'll let others chime in as well.
Yeah, from a leadership challenge, I think it's just a period of very disruptive change, and keeping people's heads focused on our safety mission is critical. I think the attrition we've seen over the last year or so, it's been large. So that's something from a leadership perspective. We need to continue to think about how are we developing our talent, how are we going to get new talent in the door once those doors are open again. So just some of the things that come to mind.
I would throw out our leadership challenges is all these distractions. I mean, we have significant restructuring, significant changes to the ROP. We have what I call this nuclear exuberance out there, all these shiny balls out there that are out there for all of us and the industry and the NRC as well. My message to our inspection staff and when I go out and talk to the new operator at the operator licensing dinner is not to let those distractions get in our way of focusing on plant safety for the operators and for us as regulators. We cannot let those shiny objects distract us. So I see those distractions as the most significant leadership challenge that we have.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I'll add motivation. I think right now is a time where the agency is going through a lot of change, and a lot of the change these days is being seen as reductions or shifting of priorities and that kind of thing. So I think it's important to make sure that we're motivating people to just stay focused on the things that we need to stay focused on as a regulator. And I'm reminded back in the mid-90s when we started to talk about changing from SALP to ROP, it was like the end of the world, and somebody said that in the earlier session.
Yes.
I wasn't even involved in it. I was sitting in headquarters doing a technical review, and a friend of mine that was out in the inspection ranks called me and yelled at me, "What are you guys doing today we swear by the ROP and we don't want it changed," right? So I wonder if 20 years from now we'll look back and we'll say, this wasn't as bad as we thought it might be, or maybe we'll adjust along the way and it'll get a little different. Maybe, people mentioned if performance changes, maybe we tweak it up a little bit. So I don't know. I don't know what the future holds, but I can tell you times of change are hard on the staff. Our job is to keep them motivated to stay focused on the right things.
I think one thing that's been interesting in this time of very disruptive change is that I've seen sort of two camps, and I'm sure there are people in the middle as well, but I've seen or heard recollections of people who are really energized by the change, is very excited, and then there are people who are either fearful or frustrated or feel like it's too much, right? You know, there's so much change all at once, it's hard to grasp what the ultimate outcome will look like and if there are any unintended consequences that might be coming our way. So how do you as leaders manage that range of feelings that you might be experiencing among the regional staff?
You have to be empathetic to the staff. I mean, those feelings are very real for them. You can help them by sharing your own career experiences. I've been through a lot of disruptive change throughout my entire career. But in that process, there's also a great amount of opportunities to present themselves if you're seeing them in front of you and willing to take some risks and try something new. So I try to keep it optimistic in people's minds. It can be difficult to do that when people are afraid, but those feelings are real to them, so you really have to pay attention to it.
I've tried to be, in the spirit of transparency, really share my views on all these changes that are coming about. I've shared with our inspector staff that there are some proposed changes that I didn't agree with. But my views did not prevail, but I was heard. And now when the commission provides direction, we will execute. So sharing with them the fact that there's not entirely, we're not all just blindly heading in one direction, that I, even where I sit today, have an opportunity to try to influence because I have similar concerns to what they have. I think that helps everyone understand that, again, we're all focus on the safety mission, we'll make adjustments, we'll adapt as necessary, and if our particular personal views don't prevail, we'll still adjust and we'll move forward, which is the same emotions that they're going through, uncertainty and trying to understand where we're headed. So being transparent about your own personal views and where you think the agency's headed, I think that's helpful.
Yeah, and I can, just recent example where I was sitting with someone and just like you said, being honest about the feelings, said, well, I know that we have to be cheerleaders for the change. I said, no, we don't have to be cheerleaders for the change. We can have our own views, and we can share our views, and those views get heard. Then decision makers that have the authority for those decisions make those decisions, similar to what you said. And then we have a choice to make after that, right? So I think my choice will be, decision is made. We're here, we're going to implement that decision. We're going to do it in the best way we can. Mm-hmm. We have a very dedicated staff. I think once we're through the change, I think they're going to implement the new programs. That's what I think is going to happen, honestly. Some people do find great opportunities with the change. We have people that have desires, career desires, to go work on other stuff. This change has provided those opportunities for them. Mm-hmm. So. But yeah, you don't have to be a cheerleader. I agree with you, Julio. You could be honest about your feelings. But the decision makers will make the decision, and our staff is very capable. They'll implement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cleve, do you have any perspectives to add from your experiences where you've seen the need to make changes? And how do you bring people along if they're struggling with that?
Yeah, I thought those were actually really good answers, right? Talk about it in those kind of settings before the day when you're actually working on the problem, right? And acknowledge that, it's change, and change frustrates people, all of us, yeah. Okay? By definition, it takes us out of a comfort zone, okay? Yeah. But you've got to be able to paint the picture of what that future success is going to look like and the motivation of why the change is necessary. And, there's a certain amount of talking, and then decisions have to be made, and progress has to be made. And there's a critique opportunity, and acknowledge that it's not going to be a perfect step forward, but you put enough, safeguards around the edges so that you can have that variation in performance while moving forward and not falling below the line. Mm-hmm. But there's a patience that comes with getting everyone aligned. Right. But once you get that synergy, you've got to move forward. And then we went through some recovery stuff at the station, and there were times where I just kind of had their mind, I just got to sit and wait for us to get to this next waypoint before we put the next target out there. But it just takes a minute. So, but I thought those were good responses.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. There's a very human element to this, and I agree. You know, a lot of change can take us out of our comfort zones, and each person has a unique reaction to that. So taking the time to talk to people and understand what that means to them, and you know, and help them understand the outcome. You know, focusing on the outcomes is really, I think, a good perspective.
I think there's a real value. The staff will appreciate decisiveness, like you said, right? They may or may not agree. Been heard, I'm going to make a decision and be clean on that. I think that's very important.
I agree. I think the certainty, we've heard that over the course of the past several months where we've been working on the reorganization proposal, you know, and ROP proposals, right? That just that high degree of uncertainty has been very disruptive to the staff. You know, we've had attrition because people have said, I just don't want to wait to understand what the organization is going to look like, what the program will look like. There's too much uncertainty. So I agree with you in that let's make a decision and then we can move forward. And I think that does take an element of stress out of it. So it gives people some certainty to understand what the landscape looks like. So speaking of landscape, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about training and staff development. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the competency-based qualification program and want to hear some perspectives about that. And I'll just take a moment to tee up the topic. You know, obviously the agency has been working to refine our training programs over the course of time to make sure they're as productive and tailored as possible, where we're spending time where it matters. So with the competency-based qualification program, we've had 7 employees who have made it through the program and have been qualified, and 23 that are enrolled. So I'd like to hear from you all. What do you think are some of the benefits and lessons learned from implementing the competency-based qualification program within your region?
So I'll give it a shot, and then anybody else can weigh in. So I think it's a great program, in my opinion. It's you know, we've got the resident inspectors qualification as part of it now. We have the administrative assistant qualification part of it now, just recently added. It's a program that's based on successful demonstration of ability. I was debating whether to tell this story or not, just in case it still happens. But when I showed up at the agency in 1992, they gave me 10 CFRs, 2 volumes, and they gave me, I don't know how many sheets of quiz questions with multiple choice, and I spent probably a few days sitting at a desk reading 10 CFRs and trying to circle the right answer for the multiple choice questions. That was my initiation to the agency. Now I stayed, and I love the fact that I stayed. I actually, you know, it didn't scare me away, but that was kind of my introduction. So, you know, this program is not intended for you to be sitting, reading, and answering textbook type
Not the self-study qualification program?
Well, it's tailored, so it is kind of individualized, but it's not a self-study
right.
in that way, right? It's outcome-based. It's skills-based. It's a demonstration of your capabilities rather than, you know, completing a series of training classes, if you will. So I really like it. It's personalized. You know, if an individual comes in and they've got a lot of experience, they could run through it quickly. They don't have to spend a lot of time on things that they don't need to spend a lot of time on. One thing that was mentioned earlier, Commissioner Weaver said it. He goes, you know, when he was asked the question about what would you advise new people that want to come in, he said, spend time in the field, spend time at the plants, right? Well, I can tell you that's what it's designed to do. Our resident inspectors that are getting qualified through the CBQ program are actually stationed a lot of their time at the plants, getting the experience with a mentor to help them, to guide them. They're being assigned work like the residents do and being helped along with that work to make sure that they're learning from it, right? We have a qualified inspector with them, so I think that provides them the assistance they need to develop and get qualified. So from a pros perspective, they get mentors. Our old programs had mentors too, but they get mentors that help them through the program. It is training in the field. It's doing the work with qualified inspectors. It is customized, tailored to the individual, which is great, in my opinion. And the exams are practical. You know, one of the things that was added, I think when we were going through the pilot for this one, was a test that gets done at the end in a simulator. You know, one of the duties of a resident inspector is on a day when we have an event is to report to the site and be the eyes and the ears for the team back in the NRC that's assessing the event and where we go with it. So one of the things that was added, during the pilot, I believe, is they'll take the person in training, they'll take them to one of our technical training center simulators, they'll bring them into a simulator that's set up as having an event, and they'll say, do your job. Let's see how well you do, right? Which is amazing. I didn't have that when I was going through training, so I think it's great. Some of the challenges that we have, I don't want to harp on challenges. We did have a few. Every new program will have some challenges that come along with it. This is on us. I'm not pointing finger on any of the mentors that were involved. This is on management. We assigned mentors that understood the job that they were doing, so they were residents that understood the resident job, but we didn't fully brief them and train them on what the program involved, right? So when they were helping these mentees, the mentees were explaining to them the program and what the program involved. So again, not on any of the mentors, that's on us to make sure that we did that correctly. Another one was the sign-offs, to make sure that we get through their sign-offs smoothly. You want everything to work smoothly for people. We had systems that we were using to get sign-offs to make sure that they're completing certain aspects of the qualifications, and we struggled a little bit with that initially. But we're taking these learnings, we're adjusting, and I think it's a great program, and I think it will continue to grow, hopefully, as adding additional disciplines in it. So I'm excited about the program.
Thank you. Let me ask Cleve, in your experience, do you have any recollections of changes to training programs that you felt have been really beneficial that perhaps we can learn from?
Yeah, so it's actually a really good topic right now. I had thought about a lot of the kind of parallels of what the industry has gone through in the last few years relative to the change that the NRC has in front of them. There's a new concept that was introduced through IMPO the last couple of years called teaching and learning. And we in true form, like rule-based people we are, had great conversations around what's the definition of training, what's the definition of learning, and had to parse all that out. And for people that maybe don't know, that there's an accreditation process that our training programs have to go through. They're regulated. There's an accreditation board, there's an evaluation report that goes to accreditation board, and they ultimately have to judge whether to renew the accreditation there. So what that means, it sounds real simple, right? But it's a lot like this circumstance we get in here. Now it's very rule-based, and the consequence of going on probation is very high. It's very, very painful. So avoid that at all costs. So certainly you want to get the knowledge into your folks, you want to get the performance there, but you also really want to pass the audit, okay? So now this cottage industry of being able to pass the test shows up. And now over the course of time, once you're successful, you rinse, repeat. You want to do that over and over again and get very consistent. Well, that gets you good, consistent performance over the course of time. What it also does is kind of really lock you down and make you not evolve and change and get better. So this concept of teaching and learning is more in that arena. For example, I'm a car guy. I can change, I do change the brakes out on my car, okay? I'm qualified, okay? I still go watch the 5 or 10 minute YouTube video before I go do it because I remember all the tools, there's proficiency elements, there's smart ways to lay, all these other things that do positively affect performance. So the industry wants to really start taking advantage of that. And you think about proficiency, right? I might have a wall, but we only take that valve apart every 5 or 10 years. But if I take a video of 5 years ago when I did it and I rewatch that video now, you can imagine my error rates are going to go down, and organizationally they're going to go down. So there's a lot of that sort of parallel I see of we're tugging with the sacred rules while wanting to be efficient and effective and leverage things like technology and trying to make sure that those don't get counter to each other. So there's a lot of opportunity in this space, and new staffing, new people coming in. If you have a silly training program, you are not impressing them, right? Here, go do CBTs for 4 weeks. Yeah, they're not going to do it, nor should they.
Thank you for that. So speaking of bringing in new talent or preparing for changes in workload, we have a question from the audience. really asking us, should we find the need to ramp up the inspection program in the future? What does that process look like? It takes a long time traditionally to train our inspectors, right? We have the NRAN program, takes 18 months, to bring someone in from a new hire stature to really fully qualified and ready to enter, a specific place in the workforce. So what are your perspectives on how we would go about that if we need to bring more inspectors on board to address the surge in work?
You want to go?
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at it. So it was talked about performance, industry-wide performance, increasing, decreasing, or site-wide, et cetera. I think, if there's a need to change the program in the future, it would be in response to performance. Industry-wide would be the biggest thing driving hiring. If it was for a particular site, we can easily divert resources, be it from the specific region, another region, or headquarters. I don't see a step change occurring across the fleet such that we couldn't respond in 12, 18, 24 months or so. It's really no different than what's happening at headquarters with fuel cycle applications and requiring staff to do those brand new reviews or advanced reactors. So I really don't see the potential challenges with the inspection program any different than it is with the licensing program. I guess the licensing program, you do have a forecast of applications, but honestly, there's never been a step change in terms of the entire industry performance. There's gradual increase, I guess that's a decrease. There's gradual decreases or gradual increases, et cetera. So I think we're flexible and we can respond. We have had challenges over the past couple years in terms of staffing resident sites, operator licensing, et cetera. We use resources from the other regions. We use resources from headquarters. If some of our resources, our phenomenal staff, end up doing licensing work, we can always pull back into the headquarters organization and use those individuals.
If 10, 15 years from now, I won't be here, but 10, 15 years from now, if the state of our thinking is still in a more focus on deterministic focus and having difficulty reaching decisions on lower level issues, we will have failed, clear as day, because we should not be thinking of the old South ways of thinking. I'm a strong supporter for continuing this journey of becoming a risk-informed regulator. 10 years ago, I had an employee from Region 2. I was still in Region 3. He asked me for some advice. He said, what should I be thinking about today? What should I focus on to grow? And I gave him an answer. And yesterday, one of the chief nuclear officers introduced me to a young engineer that's out there, and she asked me the same thing. What would you advise? And the answer was the same: become a risk thinker. So I think as we move to this new structure and we're thinking of moving perhaps, well, I think we are, our technical training center, training as a whole to research, I think there may be opportunities for us to think about not only the CBQ, but perhaps a dedicated structured program that develops risk thinkers. We used to have an optional, I forget what we called it, an optional program where you look at some videos and you get checked out and you get certified, but I think we need to do something differently because that's what the future is going to look like, so we can distinguish the difference what deterministic and risk-informed looks like. We often talk about, one last thought, we often talk about focusing on the more important things and not on the lesser things. So if one of our inspectors said, what would you like me to do differently? I hear you. What do you want me to do differently? If we're not able to answer that question, we need to do some more work. So that's kind of our challenge for us here at DI.
Great challenge. We'll have to talk about that in our periodics, won't we?
Never mind.
No take backs.
For the record, we took it.
So I have a question here related to the 5072 EGM. So I'll take a moment and set the stage a little bit. So recently the NRC issued enforcement guidance, an enforcement guidance memorandum that offered discretion for violations of non-emergency reporting criteria. So if a licensee were to not report an event report that we feel has little or no safety significance, probably no safety significance, honestly, we wouldn't cite a violation for that. And I think that was us dipping our toes, right? Leaning forward and helping to work through some of this culture change. So obviously we had some inspector reinterpretation. So I'd like to hear some accounts for how this, how this change has gone about in the regions, what reactions you've gotten, but also how are we working to clearly communicate the intent of shifts like this or changes in behaviors that we're looking for as we come down the line? Did we miss an opportunity here to help socialize this more before implementation, or how have we approached it, after the EGM has been issued to help use it as a learning opportunity?
Yes, so the EGM was a good idea, and I think it well-intentioned. I think in our rollout to our staff, we could have done much better in terms of communicating that it was coming, why we were doing it. I think some of the resident inspectors were probably surprised. And then just trying to understand the background about why we were doing that. We essentially don't want them focusing on a low-level issue such as that, even though it's a compliance issue. We have made a decision to exercise discretion, and we just could have done better, I think, in terms of communicating with our staff.
Mm-hmm. That's good feedback. So maybe a little bit more, if I could sort of get a little more in terms of, so perhaps we missed an opportunity on the forward end to communicate. What have we done afterward to help people understand the reason behind the EGM, why we issued it, and the importance of using it as a tool to help us focus our time where it matters most?
Yeah, I think we did follow up with the staff. We got some, I think we were responsive, the program office and the regional administrators as well, in terms of being receptive to the feedback we got, and then, ensure that we provided feedback to the staff to let them know, why the decision was made the way it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think, interestingly, as a conservative regulator, we're used to taking things stepwise, right? Mm-hmm. First, we come up with an idea, we develop it, we propose it, then we get it finalized, and then we implement it. We have tools in our toolkit, like in this case, the enforcement manual allows us to exercise the enforcement discretion that we're exercising in this place. So I think what it is communicating how we came about exercising enforcement discretion for the staff to let them know that, right? No, we're not going to expect licensees to report this. We're not going to expect you to go out and write a violation. And we have this tool in our toolkit, right? It exists. We have the discretion. We have the ability to exercise discretion in this case. So I think that message went out. I think when the feedback came back and said, hey, what is the intent here? What are we going to do with this? Should we no longer? We saw that there was a gap in communication, and then it was clarified with the basis and the discretion that the NRC has the authority that the NRC has to exercise discretion. So that's my sense.
Great. Okay, so next question I have is very specific, but I think it's a good question. I think over the course of the past 5 years, we've seen shifts in our approaches to inspections. During COVID, obviously that required us to find different approaches to implement the oversight program. And now we're in a more normal state of affairs. So this question really pertains to remote inspection versus on-site inspection. And if there's an option for the inspectors, what are the criteria that go into forming those decisions? Really, is it a personal choice or preference for the inspectors of whether they're doing an inspection in person or on site, or do we have expectations for how to make that decision, or what to bear in mind when making the decision?
I think a lot of it's going to depend upon the particular inspection, the site, and what the particular procedure is. I mean, to the extent that the inspector has been at that site before, knows the procedures, knows the organization, and just needs an updater. So it's more readily available to do that, in a remote type manner. To the extent that an individual inspector in preparation has to engage significantly with a licensee, it's probably more appropriate to do it in person, or more productive to do it in person.
COVID didn't help us in terms of developing our inspectors, and we had to undo, I believe, what COVID did to us, if you will, in terms of our expectations for inspectors, expectations on the thoroughness of inspections, and what that looks like. So I think we're still recovering from that. I think we need to be clear on our expectations. I've traveled to all the sites in Region 2 recently, and just to assess how we operate. And I've shared with them, at least my own personal view, that it takes, for a resident, it takes 5 years to really know the plant. And we need that deep base knowledge in case there are some events and there's a water pouring out of somewhere, smoke, fire. I want to know what's on the other side of that wall. I want to know where that valve, that pump is, and what else is around there. So if we believe that to be important, as I do, is we need to bring back that clarity and expectations for our resident inspectors. The regional inspection effort, that's a little bit, I think we have some room to work there as well, particularly on the engineering inspections. I'm looking forward to see what the final procedure looks like, to see if there's opportunities there to kind of get a good balance. But as the Commissioner Weaver said this morning, being out in the plant, being out in the field, that should be #1 priority.
Thank you. So next topic I want to spend a few minutes on is aging management. I won't make any jokes about it. We're focused on the fleet here, folks, the fleet, all right? So first we'll start with our regional representatives, and then Cleve, I'd like to hear from you as well. So with respect to aging management, what standards and opportunities exist for the regions to ensure that the current fleet continues to operate safely and in accordance with our regulations as we go into those extended periods of operations?
I think, it's really a multifaceted program, both with licensees and, with the NRC. With licensees, just normal maintenance and surveillance, keeping on top of the equipment. NRC, we of course have the maintenance rule that establishes performance expectations out there. We have our residents that do normal inspections and look for signs of degradation. In addition, the regions, the engineering branch, every 4 years, there's an age-related degradation inspection. And if you sort of pull that away, there's license renewal and there's subsequent license renewal. There's requirements for licensees to identify age, time-limited aging analysis and system structures and components, and come up with aging management programs for that. That's part of the licensing program, but in support of the licensing program, the regions, we go out and we do inspections prior to license renewal and after license renewal of that. And a very similar thing occurs for subsequent license renewal. So I think the program is covered pretty well. In addition to that, our Office of Research, they keep track of aging management issues over the years. So I do believe there's a very healthy footprint out there.
I agree. So Cleve, what tools have you or the industry implemented to navigate license renewal, and have you seen any potential challenges arise in the process?
I think it's important to give consideration to how robust and extensive those license renewal reviews and applications are. If you've ever seen the GAL, the Generic Aging Lessons Learned document, I call it the great big book of everything, because it's the most extensive list of any operating experience I could imagine that anyone could ever put together. I understand like 70% of the plants have gone through license renewal, and some 20% are in subsequent license renewal. So that's a lot of ground that's been plowed there, and programs have been put in place, like you said. And I can tell you, at our today is actually our birthday. We're 41 years old today at our plant. But implementing long-range inspection plans and stuff like that is right down the fairway for us, right? It's the kind of things we do. So it's a matter of getting that consistency and rigor and right skill sets involved there. But I think it's worth noting, people may not think about this very much, a nominal capital budget for a plant is like $100 million. There are a lot of improvements that go on constantly at our plants. So it always drives me crazy. I thought you were going to go there. The newspaper articles, it just sets me off. The aging nuclear power plant. Nothing else starts with it, putting the aging. I'm like, what's not aging? How did we get that title?
They're not even saying happy birthday, are they?
That's right.
That's wrong. That's a great perspective. So there's another theme that's coming up in the questions from the audience, and that's around advanced reactors and how we're preparing for the oversight of advanced reactors. And I think we have a little ground to cover there, maybe a few more shovels, right, before we really need to implement the oversight program. But would any of you like to offer perspectives on how we are preparing or how we'll be ready to meet the need for the advanced reactor construction oversight program to be implemented?
If I could, I'd just offer some thoughts. We in the regional offices and certainly in Region 2, we do have some inspectors that are qualified to do construction inspections. And they've helped us out quite a bit. They continue to do their engineering inspections, ISI inspections. They also do inspections and are available to do inspections to assist in the fuels facility construction. Within fuels, we do have a couple of branches that do a lot of work on either construction or operational readiness, and we should be able to rely upon the resources on reactor construction. We have a few people on civil structure and the like that can also help. With the new Office of Advanced Reactors, we are making decisions about resources, moving resources from our current organization to assist with the Office of New Reactor and New Construction. We have needs there, as well as I said, on fuel fabrication facilities. So we are going to have to, in my view, slowly measured, monitored growth in those areas through cross-qualification. So I think we're at a good place to start making those plans and then forthcoming hiring decisions to get us so that we land nicely and not overshoot.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think the reorg will help us be aligned for that as well. I think the vision there is that the Office of Advanced Reactors would have some program managers that would help facilitate advanced reactor construction oversight, and then we would leverage the regions to help us implement the program. So I think that we'll be well ready when that time comes, and we're getting folks in the pipeline so that we have plenty of inspectors, and we've projected workload as well. So I think we're in a place where we have confidence that we'll have the staff we need to implement the program. So I'm excited for that. So moving on to the next topic, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to offer the opportunity for everyone to offer some closing reflections. One of the things that I think is important as we undergo these changes is safety culture. So I want to just take a moment and hear some reflections from each of you about how we're maintaining a strong safety culture in the regions. Change can have a fatiguing effect on people, and obviously there are program changes underway. We'll need training on the new reactor oversight process, changes there. And so how do we make sure that we're hearing the views and perspectives of our staff, and we're encouraging differing views to be raised as we're implementing all these changes, but we're still decisive in moving forward?
We continually engage our staff to get their ideas on what we can do to improve how we're communicating with them, improving our processes, and we just are continually working with them to come up with new ideas. I think it's just important that we continue to do that moving forward.
Obviously, the culture, safety culture, probably the most difficult thing that we do as leaders. I often throw out this joke about I've been dealing with humans my whole life, so I know how sometimes change is very difficult. I'm not sure that my comment will be relevant 20 years from now, because we probably won't be dealing with humans our whole life. There'll be some other, who knows, in the backdrop. Nonetheless, changing circumstances, distractions, does cause stress, does cause concern on safety, focus, what's our role, what's our mission. So listening, clearly important. Making decisions, clearly important. And being transparent about those decisions will be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know some of the same. I think I want to hear from my staff, right? I mean, I think they have a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions, a lot of ideas sometimes, and I think the biggest thing is to make sure that I'm getting a sense of what's out there. I may not be able to meet with every one of them one-on-one, but I rely on the rest of the management team. I rely on relationships I have with some of them to come and share with me what they're thinking, what others are thinking, what sorts of things are on their minds. And if I can get that from folks, I think I can deal with how to help. Mm-hmm. The other thing with the restructuring and changes in the ROP, and I think it was said in earlier sessions, it is about getting information out there. We have very smart staff. They can navigate just about anything. I think we've navigated change for my entire career. The NRC has navigated change, right? This is different, and I will admit it, this is different, and I've said that to people. But look, we've changed from the SAL program to the ROP program. We were threatened with a 30% reduction. We call it the near-death experience back in the 90s. We've dealt with a lot of that stuff. I think the most important thing in times like this is the transparency and making sure that you're sharing as much information as you can with them so that they can come to you and be able to have those conversations, and then you can get to what's on their minds, what's bothering them, what we need to do. It helps me do my job when I get information from them. It helps me get in tune with where the organization is, what stressors they're having, so that I can try to address some of that. Part of my job is to take away those stressors, right, to the extent that I can. So, thanks.
Yeah.
So I'll double down on the transparency and openness, without a doubt. And, to me, is it really safety culture that's on the staff's mind? I think it's an issue with anxiety in terms of the change that has just been coming and coming and coming and not quite here for 12, 15 months or so. Mm-hmm. So what they really want are the decisions, the certainty. They want to know who their supervisors are. They want to know the organizations, division directors, on up. Recently the commission has significantly issued major decisions. It was discussed in terms of the commission's recent voting record, and I think the staff is very appreciative of those decisions. The placement of senior executives across the agency is very important, and we're working through that process. I know within Region 4, I'm the only, so we have Julio, of course, but he's in Region 2. So of the 6 of us, I'm the only senior executive left. Of course, Jeremy is up in headquarters, but the same thing happens when you go down to the branch chief ranks. We've lost more than 50% of our branch chiefs, and they have acting branch chiefs. And in terms of certainty, in terms of confidentiality, in terms of embracing, it's that relationship between the staff and their immediate supervisor. We do the best we can, but that real intimate relationship is between the supervisor and the branch chief, and we really need to get our organization in place to provide that confidence to the staff. I don't think it's really a safety culture issue, but I think the staff is distracted. And I think what we've done recently has been phenomenal in making decisions, and we just got to keep rolling with the decisions. So, yeah.
Great. So on that, I'd like to just very quickly ask each of my regional administrators and acting regional administrators, sorry team, we're close, I think, to making final decisions on a lot of our SES placements. But obviously change management is a high priority for us right now. So part of our change management plan is really driving us to think about ways to make durable changes. And we've thought about, for each leader who's going to become permanent in a role, having them have a 100-day plan. Really, what are you going to focus on in your first 100 days in the role? So you all probably have an advantage that you're familiar with the organizations. Maybe you won't have a disruptive placement. But what would you say is just give me one of your priorities for the first 100 days after we've settled out of the reorg? What are you going to prioritize, and what does success look like in achieving that goal that you're going to set?
So I'll take it, so no one else does.
Very clever. Strategic.
Yeah. So in terms of the management model and sustainability, I think it's going to be very important for us to model the behaviors at the various different levels of the organization. So the executives, the EDO level, the branch chiefs, et cetera. So I think, yeah, the management model and walking the talk is going to be very, very important to us. So I took the easy one.
Mohammed, we're going to go in reverse order now. And then Cleve is going to see if there's anything to add at the end that he has.
I agree. I think your question is about once we reorganize and once the decisions are made and people are in places. I agree with what you said. I think I look forward to that because I need to get with my leadership team and start looking at human capital type discussions about gaps. We're going to have people that may end up in places. We may have vacancies. We may have hiring that we need to do, training that we need to do. What sorts of what organization we have left and how do we manage that organization from maintaining a strong organization within the region. And it's going to be a small enough SES leadership team, so it could maybe even be done across the CNRI, right? It doesn't have to be local to just one region. Maybe we start there and then we expand it and do across the CNRI.
For me, I'm really focusing on alignment on the changes, the operational and excellence model. So it's alignment and empowerment. That's kind of where I want to lead the organization. If there are issues that are preventing us from moving forward, how can we mitigate those issues? If we want to talk about risk, how do we mitigate or manage those risks, those conditions that get us to know it will not work? How can we mitigate those to make it work? So to me, that's about empowerment, figuring out a way to make it work, where our new path is.
Yeah, I think for myself is trying to navigate the change of separating the materials business line from the reactors and maintaining our cultural stability that is so important to us as NRC. So being able to lead, set the tone, demonstrate the appropriate behaviors, and just try to pull us together as a team to make sure that we retain that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Cleve, from your experience, how have you prioritized outcomes in undergoing major changes, or what recollections do you have that might be helpful to us to think about, what we should focus on in those first days after we reorganize?
Well, cultural change is what's foundational among all these discussions. That just takes time, and normally in the industry we consider it's 3 years kind of minimum to really have that full effect. I think what is important is that modeling part, and I thought all those were really good answers, but modeling those behaviors so you know that what might be most important at the 100 days is that you stop and evaluate and assess and have that learning window and model that here's how we move forward. So actually we didn't make 100%, but we know we're going to circle back here, and that kind of gives that person permission. And it'll get down to one individual, right? And you just can't survive gotcha type organizational teamwork, right? But we've all probably been in that place where our gut feeling was something wasn't exactly right, and we really wanted to hit the stop button, but we couldn't verbally articulate why, right? Well, now you get in an organization where you have enough confidence. I know we're going to critique this on the backside, and I'm going to keep working on my gut feeling till I can articulate. And you have a culture where people now know when they've got it right, they can put it on the table and it'll be taken seriously. So anyway, building those foundational, but I think I saw it in the mission statement. And again, it's kind of how you attack that. How, what attitudes do you have in the teamwork piece? I think that's going to be really, really important. And like at our station, we only win together. We might lose together, but apart we will definitely lose, right? So you have to sort of line up. We only succeed if we're together, so to facilitate that.
Well, thank you all. I think that we have a bright future ahead. We have very dedicated staff, and your leadership has been pivotal to helping us to prepare for the reorg and the changes to the reactor oversight process. So I think that we're in great hands, and I appreciate you all taking the time today to talk about what the future of oversight looks like in the region. So if you could all join me in giving a round of applause to our speakers. Thank you.